remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place.
Greetings. Welcome to Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kwesi Gunadu. On this episode, our focus will be who is really insane or crazy. Now, I'm going to start with a story of a class I used to teach entitled Health, Healing, and Medicine in African Societies. And it's a course that was pretty popular. Nonetheless, in this course, we would crisscross the African continent, surveying specific African societies, looking at different facets of health, healing, and medicine within those societies, using a range of texts, primary sources, videos, you name it. Now, I remember that in the course, toward the end of the course, there was a module or section on psychiatric history within Africa, or mental health history within Africa. And in that section, I began to teach a class about conceptions of mental health and what are the underlying premises as well as the folly or misnomers regarding mental health and how that translates into sort of medical and social practice, both within the hospital setting and within the communities of those who are deemed to be mentally ill. Now, I bring up this class because it was my fondest class in teaching, precisely because, I have members in my family who are classified as being mentally ill or have a mental condition or disorder, whatever you want to label it, however you want to name it, same difference. And so not only the class personal to me, it was also a moment where I could actually impart some of my experience, of course, in disguise, whereby I would not mention the name of those persons or even any identifying information about them, but I would tell stories, somewhat like a pseudonym, generically. So it gave me some experiential data to actually offer to the class that would add up with the other data that we have to, distill in the course. Now, you don't have to have someone in your family or someone within your community to be able to appreciate what I'm going to share with you. Indeed, walking on the streets, whether you take public transportation or whether you drive or whatever means you get to work, home, and in between, you will encounter people that have been deemed or classified as being mentally ill, unstable, and the like. And here's a question for you, right? Who is really mentally ill? Those that are detained within the psychiatric wards, within the hospital setting, within what used to be the former mental asylums that be turned into psychiatric hospitals, and on the streets that are deemed to be homeless, and therefore almost immediately we presume that they are mentally ill. Who's really mentally ill? They or us? In other words, who's running the asylum, right? Is it the mentally insane that are detained within the asylum? Or is it the staff that houses them and manages them and essentially controls their food, their movement, etc. within that setting? And I ask not rhetorically, because this is a real question, right? I remember riding on the trains in New York City, and I used to speak to, and I still do, speak to people who are classified as homeless. And notice that I keep saying classified as homeless. I'll get back to that in a moment. And whether the subway or the streets, I would speak to them because this is what I know. I know that people that are classified as mentally ill or homeless or crazy, right? One person's crazy is another person's sane. Indeed, ever wonder why the people that are classified as homeless, crazy, insane, mentally ill, who you may see eat out of the trash can or eat whatever or drink whatever, that they don't die as easily as some of us who have high cholesterol or have coronary heart disease or have diabetes, type 1 and type 2, or have other kinds of health conditions. Why don't they just collapse and die from eating out of the trash can? from eating, back of restaurants, right? From being filthy. That is, they're not bathed, right? They haven't had a bath or a shower or haven't been cleansed, right? Why don't parasites just eat them alive? I'm going to come back to that. But I want you to think about this. In other words, if they're eating literally trash, if they're consuming trash, if they're living in trash and living in filth, sleeping on filth, sometimes their own personal waste, why don't they just simply just die and disappear? In fact, they don't. I'm sure you have too, encountered quote unquote homeless people who we deem to be mentally ill that we pass almost every day, every year, in almost the same locales. And they're still there. Think about this. Something's going on. Something in our world that is not right in terms of our perspective. That is how we see and view and therefore make meaning. You see, we have in all societies, all human societies, we have uncomprehending individuals. That is, they see something, but they don't know what it's really looking at. In other words, they don't know the meaning. You can call them uncomprehending strangers or just uncomprehending individuals. That is, they see, that is, they have big eyes, but they can't see. In other words, they can't derive or get meaning from what they see. So we see people classified as homeless, classified mentally ill. We see them right on TV. We see them on social media. We see them in the streets. We see them in all facets of life. And we rub them off because that's what human societies do in almost all cases. You see, all human societies have this one question and one problem: what to do with what they call their undesirables. That is, those that are deemed not to fit within a norm. And all societies determine a norm. So in other words, there's a majority of people in the world, and in wherever you live, that are right-handed, like I, which means the desk and other kinds of furnishing and other kinds of machines and devices are designed for right-handed people because the norm is right-handed. What about the left-handed? Something is deemed to be what? Abnormal with them or outside of the norm for them. And therefore, they may not get the same kinds of designs or enough of those designs to fit their particular needs. We do the same thing with our classified homeless and mentally ill people. We design something called a norm. And immediately when you have a norm, you have to have an abnormal. And when you have an abnormal, they have to go somewhere. Hence, psychiatric wards or the streets or the grave. But here's the deal and here's the truth. We are all walking on our grave. And I've learned that recently. You see, the earth is a big grave. Is it not filled with millions, in fact, billions of people that came before us? Yes, they're buried under our feet. It doesn't matter if a house, a building, or another structure is built upon that or a road, but it's still a cemetery. The earth is a cemetery. It's a grave. So we're all walking on our grave or somebody's grave, right? And I say that because, right, we often view the world through perspectives that we have inherited, that we have borrowed. As my professor from the Gambia used to say, we occupy or have borrowed imagination. That is, we have thoughts and thinking and perspective that don't match up to the world and how it really works. This is a big difference between how the world is presented and how it really works. And how it's presented is that we have to have a norm, therefore we have to have abnormal. We have to have undesirables. Those desirables need to be what? Warehouse, put aside somewhere. In Jamaica, the island where I was born, there are parts of the island that are designed and are designated for tourists, the people that are desirable. And what will happen is that those people who are homeless, that is without a physical home and address, right, and who are living on the streets, but a different kind of living than in, let's say, New York City or another part of the United States, they are literally shipped out of the area to not what? Disturb the norm, the artificial norm created for the tourists. This is what we do, right? We warehouse our undesirables. We categorize them as being abnormal But who is really abnormal? Let me let you think about this. You see, the history of asylums, mental asylums, dates back to certainly ancient times, in terms of religious institutions offering a asylum or refuge for those deemed to be what? Mentally disturbed, or what they refer to in England in the 19th century as pauper, meaning poor lunatics, right? The terms like mentally ill, crazy, lunatic, right? They all fit within the same umbrella. Even heretic, one that has wrong belief. They were deemed to be what? Crazy, mad, right? And they were what? Pushed aside because they were undesirable. And so there's an act that was passed in the 19th century in Britain, England. And that act was an asylum act. And that act created the first sort of psychiatric hospital for these undesirables, right? Sort of like a formal sense. Now, that act, right, ushered in what we may refer to now as a mental institution, right? At least within the context of the so-called modern world. Now, in the same token, because these institutions date back to, particularly in the European context, to warehousing people that were deemed to be what? Heretic, people with wrong belief, that were deemed to be mad. And that's why you have these inquisitions and witch hunts and trials, because these are deemed to be people that have wrong belief or ideas that were not fitting into the norm, and therefore their bodies were sinned. Their bodies were essentially containers or vessels of evil, right? And therefore they were deemed to be what? Out of their minds. So there's a very important colliding between a lunatic and a heretic. Crazy, wrong belief, right? Now, one of the features that I am fascinated by as someone who teaches and writes about the history of Africa and worldwide communities is that in African history, as far as I'm aware, and I could be incorrect, but as far as I'm aware, there were indigenous African societies. I'm talking about the more recent so-called modern ones. But indigenous African societies, what I did not find, I have not found, is A, prisons, jails, meaning formal institutions that house or warehouse the convicted, the condemned, the undesirables, and mental institutions. I travel to Ghana pretty often, right? It's one of my bases, one of my homelands in West Africa. And I've been to other parts of West Africa as well, but I'll focus on Ghana for now. And I'm struck by the fact and the feature that there are people that are deemed to be, right, not righted in the head, right? But also in that context, people there also realize that they are not righted in their spirit. Because remember, as I taught you before in previous episodes, and if you're new to Powered by Nyame, check out our previous episodes on how we conceptualize the mind. The mind is a spirit. That's why our minds will tell us two different things that are contradictory in the same head. Should I go left? Should I go right? Should I stay with him? Should I leave her? Same brain, same mind, right? And the brain is the physical organ, but the mind is the immaterial portion, right, of our being, because it is a spirit. And that's why we can have what? We can be of two minds. We can be essentially split, right, on a decision, on a phenomenon, on a what? Perspective or event. The mind is a spirit. And these African folks realized that a long time. And so I've seen people that we would classify as mad, crazy, insane, undesirable, walk in the streets like everyone else. No one bothers them. No one chastises them. No one ridicules them. It's the norm. And I remember walking in Dichiman, which is central Ghana, many times, walking on the streets, either going to a shop or just walking through. And I would see, just watch those that we consider undesirable, and it's nothing, right? It's like we drinking water, nothing, right? There's no stigma. There's no framing them as being that they don't belong, right? They just go about their business, and other people go about their business as if it were nothing. In other words, they are part of the norm. They're not warehoused or put into a position or place. And if they desire a particular cure or healing, there are spiritualists and other people that will offer that, for them. But here's something that we almost always miss. In my class, in my travels, in my studies, what we always miss, we miss the fact that people that walk among us as lunatics, as heretics, are not so. In other words, spirits in human form walk among us. Now, I'm not talking about any aliens from outer space or whatever, something we see on Netflix or on social media. I'm talking about human beings, right? In human form. Remember, from all of our previous videos, right? In our catalog in Powered by Nyame, you know that, or you may be aware of that, we the human beings are not simply matter, right, and flesh. That we are spiritual beings in the clothing of a what? Material form. That's how we have a human experience, right? In the same way that spiritual forces and figures can what? Jump in and out of our human bodies, right? Much like a plug goes into a socket and then be unplugged. The same way that there are spiritual forces that walk among us in human form, in the clothing, in the disguise of being lunatic or mad, of being homeless. That's why they don't die and disappear as we think they should by eating trash. And they should die. Meaning, based on our assumptions of consuming trash, literally and metaphorically. And being unclean, we think. Right? And smelling with this dank odor, pungent odor, that some form of insect or something should do or eat them alive. But it doesn't happen. Because these beings are there for a reason. Now, I'm not saying or suggesting that all people classified as homeless or lunatic or the like or crazy, terms that I would not use, but they're out there, so I'm going to use them. Doesn't mean that every one of them are these spiritual forces, but many of them are. Now, I'll tell you how. One time, I went to get some patties from a patty shop, and there was a woman sitting on the floor, right? Not far from where I was going, sitting on the floor. And when I passed her, she smiled. And I smiled back to her, because I told you, I speak to and I treat these people classified as homeless, crazy, etc., quite often. And so I smiled at her. And then on my way back, as I was passing her, I remember having 2 patties, maybe 3. And she said to me, she's hungry. And so I took one of the patties and I gave it to her. And she smiled again and said, thank you. But then she said this to me. She said, what are you going to eat? I said, don't worry, I'll get something. The others are for my children. And I smiled at her and she smiled at me. And then I went my way. Now, to many, just looking in our normative, normal perspective and lens that we've inherited and we've brought into, seduced into, I'm talking to a mad woman, a homeless woman. But in truth, that woman was no ordinary woman. That woman was the creator or God in flesh. Of course, creator is a spiritual force, the spiritual force, the highest caliber, right? On human form. Come to what? See if I'm really who the creator knows I am. And see how I will respond, right? See, oftentimes, our blessings come in the form of our test. To see who you really are, you say you are, or you think or you believe you are. And so oftentimes, the way we treat and regard the undesirable is more important than how we treat and regard the people that we want to be friends, or the people that we want to friend us, people that we want to be around. That's where our blessing lies. And that's where it's critically important to really change our view, our worldview, our world sense, our perspective about whom we deem to be homeless, lunatics, crazy, etc. Because there's much more to life than what we see. There's a Khan proverb that I love, among many of them, and I'll translate it for you. It says in English translation, "The stranger has big eyes, but he or she cannot see anything." Just because we see something, or our eyes have been tainted and trained to see something a certain way, doesn't mean we understand what we see. And oftentimes, again, these people who are classified as such, nothing is wrong with them. Because by normal metrics, they should be dead. But they don't die. And they're still there because they came there for a purpose. And whatever their purpose was, when they finish, then they'll move on. And oftentimes, therefore, we need to really retrain our sensibilities towards other human beings that have been classified as undesirables. Because in truth, we're the ones that are crazy. We're the ones that are out of our minds. Because if we're in our right minds, we would see these undesirables as the people in Tichimangana and other parts of the world see people as being normal. That they're part of the normal landscape. That they are no different than the rest of us if we have the eyes to see and appreciate them. For Powered by Nyame, I've been your guide and host. Please drop your questions, comments, and experiences in the comment section below. Share as much as you want or you desire. And we'll come back together next episode. Until then, stay well.